Hey, Define Yourselfers, before we get into today's video, I need to share with you a trigger warning. In this video, we will be discussing the topic of suicide. If you have or are experiencing suicidal thoughts and or ideations, please seek help. Within the United States, you can call or text 988 or visit 988lifeline.org to chat with someone who can help you through your crisis. And if this topic is a trigger to you, please stop watching this video and choose another one of the videos from my YouTube channel. Thank you. Hey, Define Yourselfers, did you know that autistic individuals are up to 3 times more likely to attempt or die by suicide than non-autistic individuals? Did you know that autistic adults without intellectual disabilities are at a higher risk? And some studies show up to 9 times more likely to die by suicide than the general public. And did you know one study found that 66% of autistic adults reported having experienced suicidal ideation at some point in their lifetime? This is significantly higher than the 17% lifetime prevalence reported in the general population. Our guest today is Lisa Morgan. Lisa is the founder of the Autism and Suicide Prevention Workshop, and together we will dive into this topic in less than 1 minute. Hey, Define Yourselfer, I am the Confident Autistic, an autistic adult, late diagnosed, and I'm a digital creator. On this channel and my website, theconfidentautistic.com, I create content that will empower you to live confidently autistic. If this is what you're looking for, please subscribe to the channel and do not forget to ring the bell to be notified when my weekly live stream starts. Our topic today is suicidal ideation awareness and suicide prevention in late diagnosed autistic adults. And our guest is Lisa Morgan. Lisa Morgan is an autistic adult diagnosed late in life. Lisa advocates for crisis support and suicide prevention for autistic people across the lifespan. She is the founder of Autism and Suicide Prevention Workshop and has led the development of several autism-specific resources. Lisa, thank you for joining us today.
It's great to be here. Thank you, Chris.
What does the Autism and Suicide Prevention Workgroup do?
We take research findings about suicide in autistic adults, and we put it together with lived experience, and we make resources that professionals can use and autistic people can use to keep themselves safe and to support them in crisis and in suicide prevention.
Now, I know I'm going to put you in the spot here a moment, and I'm sure you're going to be able to handle this, but can you, off the top of your head, think of the most alarming or troubling statistic or fact that you've learned through the work that you do through your workshop group that we need to know about that could be surprising to anyone in or outside the autism community?
Yeah, suicide is a leading cause of death for autistic people across the lifespan.
What got you involved in this line of work?
I had my own attempt that I was dealing with, and I also lost 2 family members to suicide, my nephew and my husband of 30 years, all within 6 months of each other.
Wow. That's a lot to have to process through and work through for anyone, especially someone who's on the spectrum themselves.
Yeah, it was difficult. It was my attempt, and then 3 months later, my nephew, and then 3 months later, my husband. So it was all very difficult.
Yeah, but we moved past, we got through it, and you're surviving, you're here today, and that's great.
Yes.
Why is suicide so prevalent in the late diagnosed autistic community?
Well, there are risk factors for autistic people that include a diagnosis later in life, and it's because we've been autistic our whole lives, but we haven't
Hmm.
known. And so the difficulties that come with social communication and, you know, um, being vulnerable to trauma,
Hmm.
negative social interactions, never feeling like you kind of belong, feeling that even the sensory environment's been wrong or different for you that your entire life, and then finding out in the end that you had you know, um, we're on the spectrum and not being able to do anything about it, right? So for sometimes you're 50 or 60 or 70 years old and you find out you're autistic and you can't go back and change anything. There's a lot of grief that goes with that as well.
Hmm.
So yeah, the suicide rate is pretty high.
Yeah, because I was diagnosed in my late 50s, actually at the age of 58. And many people, I've heard them experience the same. I don't want to say everyone does because each one experiences and processes autism differently. But I know I look back upon my life and looked at my life through the lens of autism. And there were some things that I was frustrated about, regretted, and wish that somebody had known earlier in my life. I have a 6-year-old great nephew who is autistic, and he's getting the resources he needs, and I'm happy for him. But I'm just thinking, if I would have gotten those resources when I was younger, what would my life have turned out to be? Would it be I will probably be different, but would I've received support and avoided some of the anxiety and challenges I had in my life? And I can see how that can cause someone to feel depressed and feel inferior and contribute to thoughts of suicide. Am I in the right train here?
Yes, you are. Yeah, thwarted belonging, perceived burdensomeness, um, co-occurring psychiatric conditions, which, anxiety and depression are
Hmm.
the top most common
Hmm.
ones that were shown in a study that came out of Denmark. So yeah, it all does fit.
So I know we talked about this somewhat, and I just want to go a little bit deeper into it. So there are some causes that can causes us to contemplate suicide, and those be social isolation. This is my
Mhm,
list, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on any of this because you've done more research than I have. Masking and camouflaging,
mhm.
later or misdiagnosis, we kind of mentioned that a moment ago, unemployment or underemployment, sensory overload and burnout, rejection or trauma in relationships, difficulty accessing mental health support tailored to autistic needs. Do you think that's a pretty thorough list, or am I missing anything there?
No, that is a really thorough list.
Okay,
A lot
good.
of them, some of them are backed by research findings, and some
Hmm.
of need more research. But for lived experience has to count. That's very, important to listen to the lived
Hmm.
experience of autistic people, and that, being underemployed or, not getting the job that you're very well capable of doing is part of it. And that thwarted belonging, masking and camouflaging is a risk factor of suicide that is backed up by research. Because you have to use, you use it to fit in. It's a social strategy, but at the same time, it does is profoundly lonely because no one really knows who you are. You're
Hmm.
faking it all the time. You're
Right.
masking. Um,
And masking can be very
autism burnout.
exhausting.
Oh, it's exhausting. Yes.
Yes, I know.
And and then people need to withdraw for self-care
Hmm.
after masking. But autism burnout too has been shown to you know, lead to suicidal thoughts and behaviors as well. So yeah, that list is a very good list.
So in social isolation, when we are not, well, when we feel excluded from holistic peers for whatever reasons or behaviors or stemming or sensory issues, whatever, feeling excluded is going to more than likely, in my opinion, contribute to our contemplation of suicide because as human beings we crave to be interacting with others and in high school it's worse, but the peer pressure to fit in and there's us never really fitting in that can contribute to the social isolation that can contribute to suicide. Is am I correct in saying that?
Yes, yeah. And then the choice, right, is either you experience that isolation and even bullying, um, or you mask. And both
Hmm.
lead to um profound loneliness, and that thwarted belonging and perceived burdensomeness that a lot of autistic people feel, um, and just don't feel like they belong to society.
Right. They don't fit in. We feel like
Right.
we're a round peg in a square hole or vice versa, whichever
Yes.
analogy you want to use. Now, how does a late or misdiagnosis impact it? I know that, we talked a little bit about looking back in our life and having regrets and looking at through the lens of autism and all. Is there any other reasons that a late or misdiagnosis contributes to our thoughts about suicide?
Well, I think a late diagnosis, you kind of have that, um, yeah, I just lost my train of thought. You kind of have that feeling of um internalized ableism where you've
Mm-hmm.
heard growing up, you're you're shy, or if you
Mm-hmm.
tried hard enough you could fit in, or
Mm-hmm.
all these things, you kind of internalize that. And with a late diagnosis, you don't know that you have autism, so you kind of blame yourself, and you end up um being really critical of yourself, I think, and that adds to it. And then the masking is just, oh, the late, I'm sorry. Um, I forgot your other one.
That's okay. We were talking about uh, late or misdiagnosis.
The misdiagnosis, yes, because females is 13 times higher, the suicide
Hmm.
rate of autistic females. So with a misdiagnosis, you're dealing with being misunderstood, not being believed, and then
Hmm.
having to undo that wrong diagnosis before you get the right one. And then having to deal with the right diagnosis when you do find out finally you're on the spectrum. So that's very complicated and very, um, just it's very tough to go through.
We're talking about late diagnosis and masking and social isolation. And I mentioned in my list here rejection or trauma in relationships. I mean, we strive to develop friendships and whatever, and for whatever reason, maybe some of our artistic traits or reactions to things which are not the way the allistic people would react, because in our culture it's acceptable, can cause us to be rejected by others and anyone, whether you're autistic or not. Rejection is not something people say, "Oh, I like to be rejected today," because it's a very unpleasant experience. And I know in my own experience, in my own life, I feel I've probably been rejected more than people who are not on the spectrum. I'm not saying that for a pity party or anything like that, but I just think people who are autistic experience rejection at a higher rate than our autistic peers, and that certainly can contribute to suicide, feeling rejected and unwanted.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, if you're not masking, right,
Hmm.
you can appear, autistic people can appear awkward or weird or quirky,
Hmm.
and possibly, unapproachable, or just don't
Hmm.
understand the social situation. So they're not maybe invited somewhere or
Hmm.
something. And then that also leads to, that feeling of profound loneliness, I think, that a lot of autistic people feel. They just don't feel connected. They just don't feel that social belonging. So,
Yeah.
but if you're masking,
Hmm.
you do sort of get in and have that, maybe form a friendship. um as a friendship gets closer, some of the mask falls off, and
Hmm.
that can cause havoc with a
Hmm.
friendship, and they can, start to question it. And I know a lot of autistic people, in my experience too, is a lot of friendships just fail and you don't know why. They're just gone.
Yeah. Hmm.
And so then you don't have an answer, and you can't learn for the next time either, because they're just gone.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Because I know that and this is not meant to be disrespectful, but I know I kind of like I can relate to Casper the Ghost, and that was a cartoon back in the 70s for those who
Yeah,
do
I
not.
remember. Yeah.
Yeah, at the beginning of every cartoon, he had no friends. At the end of the cartoon, he was surrounded by friends. Next cartoon, no friends. What happened between the two cartoons? I don't know. But I
Right.
could make when I was younger, I could make some friendships that were very difficult for me because I did not understand the process. But eventually, over time, because of unknowing that I was autistic and sensory issues, I would have behaviors that drove away friendships. And that was very hurtful to me. Even though I didn't mean to, it just, the stress of the sensory overload or whatever, not even realizing what was going on, I damaged and destroyed some good friendships. And I do have regrets on that. And I think that's something many of us experience in the autism community. We can relate to Casper in the sense that we can make friends, but suddenly they disappear and we don't know why.
Right, right. And I do think that's the experience of a lot of autistic people. It certainly is my experience as well. You think that you're doing the right thing, you're saying the right things, but it turns out that you weren't or you didn't, and you said something rude that you didn't understand was rude because it was just really honest. And yeah, it's just very complicated
Yeah,
for
I can be
autistic
very
people.
blunt.
Yeah.
My wife says, don't ask Chris a question unless you really want its answer because he will give it to you unfiltered, and I do.
And that doesn't match with most of society or the,
Hmm.
non-autistic people
Right.
who think that that is rude. And you just have this sense of being off.
Hmm.
When I was a teacher most of my adult life before I got into advocacy. And I'd be in staff meetings and say something that the rest of the staff would laugh about, and I wouldn't even know what was funny. But
Hmm.
because it just off. Like I didn't really understand, or I would say something that somebody would get offended by. And I didn't understand
Hmm.
that as just as much as, making people laugh. So um that sense of just not being on the same kind of wavelength with everybody else does, you know, cause you to feel rejected or cause you to feel just not belonging and not connected.
And these experiences can contribute for some of us to contemplate or even actively, um, I don't want to say pursue, but actively engage in a suicide attempt.
Well, it does, and research has shown that. And so when people, and as well, when autistic people reach out for support, first of all, that's a social skill as well.
Hmm.
So reaching out for support is difficult for a lot of autistic people who may
Hmm.
not have done it before. And then to say, you've lost a friendship, and it could be the fact that it's been years of friendships being lost, that
Hmm.
it's kind of the straw that broke the proverbial camel's back.
Hmm.
um, that's not understood by a lot of times by the professionals supporting them, because everybody loses friendships once in a while, but
Yeah.
it's just, they don't understand the history of friendship after friendship after friendship after friendship being lost. So even the support when autistic people do reach out, there's a disconnect there as well.
Absolutely, yeah, and with friendships, I remember as a child, friendships they change a lot when you're kids, I guess. I don't
Yeah.
know, but I
Typical.
remember going downstairs in my house into the basement, and I was kind of confused and upset about why is this person my friend yesterday and not today? I don't get it, because kids do that.
Yeah.
And I thought, why aren't friendships as easy and as long lasting as Fred and Barney on the Flintstones? Because every episode they're friends. I mean, that never changes. And I
Yeah.
thought, once you have a friend, that should be a lifetime thing. And apparently it isn't.
Right. And yeah, I like how you're using those, because Fred and Barney, they fought a lot too, but they were
Yeah.
still friends.
Hmm. Oh, yeah.
Um, and autistic people tend to be pretty loyal, and
Hmm.
they want to be friends for a really long time, but
Oh, yeah.
it doesn't always work out that way.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. Now we touched on this a moment ago about accessing mental health support tailored to autistic needs, difficulty accessing mental health to support, uh, uh, difficulty accessing mental health support tailored to autistic needs. I'll get it right eventually. Just give me a moment. I'll get it right. But so that is a contributing factor. What are some of the obstacles or barriers that is causing us to experience difficulty accessing mental health support?
Well, I think first of all, it's a social skill. It's right in the
Hmm.
social communication, that is often misunderstood, um, and not understood by autistic people and misunderstood by non-autistic people. And
Right.
so, the first time I formally reached out for help, I was about 52 years old, and it
Hmm.
was a very difficult interaction. It was hard to go in the building. I finally found out where I was supposed to be and the person I was supposed to talk to. I told her what was happening, and her response to me was she laughed. So that was another, I to this day, because I left, I don't know what
Right.
I said or what that was wrong, or what I
Hmm.
that was not enough to get her to understand my situation that I really needed help, help and support with. But there's that disconnect again. And, a lot of autistic people maybe use 988 or a crisis line, or
Right.
they have a mental health provider that they either have difficulty communicating what's going on with them, or they do communicate it and it's misunderstood. So even though the support is available, it's not really accessible a lot of times for autistic people.
Now, is the part of it we mentioned here the not support that tailored to autistic adults. So some of it's within the system and the mental health system is my impression of this, and some of it is just resources are not available for autistic adults as easily or as frequently as they are for children. Am I correct in saying that? And does that contribute to suicide?
Well, yes, in a sense, because a lot of professionals don't even know. Well, they're becoming it's becoming known, but a lot of professionals don't know that autistic people even have a high suicide rate.
Hmm.
So there's another thing too that gets in the way, which is the presentation. So a lot of autistic people internalize what they're going through emotionally. They
Hmm.
may not even understand what they're going through or feel what they're going through emotionally in the same way. So they don't look distressed. So they could say that they're suicidal, but they could be acting like I am right now, which is calm and,
Hmm.
fine. And so they're not believed. A lot of autistic people are not believed when they go seek support. And
And
support,
anyone who says they're suicidal should not be ignored.
right, right. The words have to have, with autistic people, the words have to have more weight than their presentation, because everything can be happening internally. They could be masking
Oh
heavily,
yeah.
camouflaging their emotions and their distress. So their words have to have more weight. But a lot of autistic people have gone to the ER and told clinicians there that they were suicidal, that they were having suicidal thoughts, and they were sent home because they don't look or act like the professionals think they should if they're suicidal.
Hmm. Because it would present differently from a person who's autistic compared to an autistic person. And I personally don't think there's a typical way somebody's going to present as suicidal. There's probably some common traits, but each person experiences and expresses its challenges in their life differently. And like in your case and mine, I mean, I'm in my 50s. I assume you have reached your 50s as well.
I'm
After all
61.
these years, of masking, we become really good at that, and
Yeah.
without even knowing it, and that can only make it more of a challenge for somebody to say, "Oh yeah, they're really suicidal."
Yes. And, the more, a lot of times, the more of a crisis someone is going into, the
Hmm.
more they withdraw inside
Right.
of themselves. So the
Hmm.
calmer they look on the outside. So they could look more distressed when they're in less of a crisis than when they're in full blown crisis. They could be just completely withdrawn inside themselves and don't look at it all.
Would this also be explained as we're going through autistic shutdown, and that could
Yeah.
be covering up why our tendencies are looking like we are suicidal?
Yeah, that could be shut down as well. Absolutely. And so the response we get, they go by the visual presentation, and
Hmm.
they have to go by the words.
Right. And whenever someone says they're suicidal, don't blow it off. I know some people, they hear, "Oh, you're suicidal." They don't want to believe it because we don't want to believe
Right.
somebody is at that point. But we need to take those words seriously when somebody says that, or even when we're feeling inside and we're feeling, "I'm feeling suicidal. I want to hurt myself." We should not ignore that. That's something in our body telling us we need to do something to get some help.
Yes, yes. And it is difficult to hear those words. And it is difficult to ask somebody if they are
Hmm.
thinking about harming themselves or killing themselves. But that communication is really needed to make sure that, the person can get the support they need. And sometimes people maybe even practice, saying, "Are you going to kill yourself? Do you have a plan?"
Hmm.
Just so that they can reach out to somebody they're concerned about and ask that. And it's not going to put the idea in their head. That research has shown that, that's not going to put the idea in their head. What it's going to do is open communication so that they can get the help and support they need. A lot of times too, autistic people don't know how to start that conversation. And so if somebody asks them, that's a perfect opportunity for them to say that they are feeling those feelings and having those thoughts.
That can be very challenging because for many of us, starting a conversation is challenging. Many of us script before we meet someone. I know I do scripting before I talk to somebody on the phone, especially if I call it. I used to be really bad. I've gotten better, but I used to be really bad at it. I would think about everything I could say and every possible contingency, what they would say and how I would react to it. Then I make the phone call, and then they say something I did not plan for, and I'm like up a tree. So, yes, I can see starting the conversation and saying, you know what, folks, I feel suicidal could be difficult because many of us don't even know how to start a conversation. And I know in my case, I hate small talk and I hate starting conversations because once you start a conversation, somebody's going to say something and you want to respond, but you don't know what they're expecting in your response. And it's not a good experience. And I think that could be an obstacle for some of us
Yeah,
who are struggling.
it definitely is. And then you're right, you don't know what to expect. And then when you do get the courage to tell somebody that you're suicidal, not being believed is is just going to throw a whole wrench into that reaching out for help. They may not do it again. Um, and really, if somebody does say that they have a plan or they're experiencing suicide, just being with them, just listening to them, just hearing them.
Hmm.
If somebody doesn't know what to do, just listening to them and making sure that they're safe
Right.
is you know is a really good thing to do.
Yeah, because one of the things that I think we go through when we talk to somebody, I know I do this. This is why I don't like small talk that much. Like I said, you say something that starts a conversation, they say something back, then you have to respond, and you're wondering what kind of response do they expect from me? Because for some of us, we go through what's called fawning, which is people pleasing. And then if we tell somebody was suicidal and somebody rejects that statement from us or reacts in a way we did not expect, we're going to withdraw more, and it can be make the situation worse. Am I correct in saying that?
Absolutely. When I was experiencing that, I did reach out to somebody and they said, no, you're not. So then I wondered, maybe I'm not. Um, but yeah, so it's really important to just listen to
Hmm.
the person who does reach out. And if you are concerned about somebody, it's okay to ask, and just asking that, they may be very relieved that somebody finally made a way for them to start talking about it.
Are there any social stigmas about autism that contribute to us autistic adults considering suicide?
Well, yeah, I mean, um, just there's a lot of preconceived notions,
Hmm.
stigma that is even with the mental health care providers too,
Hmm.
um, that just feeds into that lack of connection, that lack of belonging. Um, the ableism, you should
Right.
be able to do this. I mean, we do that to ourselves too, the internalized ableism.
Hmm.
But you should be able to do this. You should be able to have a job. You should be able to, you know,
Keep a
drive,
job.
live alone, whatever it is,
Hmm.
um, just contributes to a sense of helplessness, failure,
Hmm.
that we're already probably down on ourselves about, because we're really kind of harsh with ourselves.
Yes, we
Um,
are. We can be our harshest critic.
yep. And, you know, masking from a young age can cause
Hmm.
us to have an underdeveloped sense of self, which is easily, can easily be swayed to thinking those same stigmas about ourselves. That, yeah, we should be able to do this. And a lot of autistic adults, especially those diagnosed later in life, they've struggled with that a long time. Like, why can't I do this? Everybody else is doing it. Why can't I have a job? Why can't I have a long-term
Hmm.
relationship? Why can't I make a friend? And
Yeah.
it just kind of builds and builds.
What signs as late diagnosed autistic adults should we be watching for within ourselves that may indicate that we are heading towards contemplating suicide?
That's a really good question because for me, I didn't know
Mhm.
at first. I even though I was having suicidal thoughts and behaviors, I didn't think I was actually suicidal. I thought I was just escaping and into this, um what was actually a plan. And it was just
Mhm.
like an escape. So having those thoughts of leaving, having those thoughts of escaping, having those thoughts of harming yourself, any of those thoughts should be alarming. Um, and then, thoughts of just it really is about escaping and not being here anymore. I think. And then a lot of research has shown autistic people even research ways to die. So any
Mhm.
research that you're doing, anything like that, um, you may have, you know, gone down that suicidal path farther than you think.
So we talked about, that we're heading towards contemplating suicide. Is there any difference between the warning signs we should be looking for when we're heading towards contemplating suicide compared to actively contemplating suicide, or is that basically the same?
Well, I think it's the same, but if you do have a plan and somebody has a plan and they have a time and a day, that's very, very dangerous. As well, with autistic people and impulsivity, along with
Hmm.
alexithymia, which is the inability to understand one's own emotions,
Hmm.
um, that can be very dangerous too. If you even have suicidal thoughts and you have alexithymia, and then you might be impulsive, you might harm yourself or, die by suicide before you even understand what's happening if that impulsivity plays into alexithymia and those suicidal thoughts.
So, what should we do if we are contemplating suicide? I think that's probably one of the most important questions of this interview. And what you're going to share is the most important information I want people to get from this interview. So, what should we do if we are contemplating suicide?
I would say tell somebody that you trust. Um, tell, if you're working with a therapist, tell them, make your own place safe so you can reduce access to means.
Mhm.
Um, but I think the most important thing and the most difficult even thing is to tell somebody.
Now, we talked about that being a little challenging to start that
Yeah,
conversation. Can you give us some suggestions on how we can tell someone? I mean, we can always do it verbally, but I'm sure we could text somebody. We can write a note. I mean, not a suicide note, but a note saying, I need some help or something. So, what would be a good way for somebody who's on the spectrum, who is thinking about committing suicide or contemplating it, how they can start that conversation and reach out for help?
yeah, I think you said it. They could text, they could talk, they could write it, they could draw it even.
Hmm.
If assistive device is being used, they can use that. But really just letting somebody know, I think, and not having it be just your own thoughts, bringing it out into the open can really open the door to getting that support that you need.
And when you're at that point, it doesn't matter how you communicate it. Whatever's most comfortable for you, don't worry about how that person's going to judge you and say, well, you should have said it verbally. Just whatever way you can express it is going to be the appropriate way, as long as you express it in a way that you're not actually harming yourself, that you're requesting or reaching out for help. Would you agree with that?
I totally agree with that. Yes. And if, this is really hard and would take a lot of energy, actually,
Hmm.
but if the first person you tell doesn't believe you for some reason, tell another person.
Right. Yes. Don't give up. Don't let somebody's no stop you from reaching out for help. Just
Yes.
find somebody else who will listen. And that person's no is not a reflection upon you, it's a reflection upon their character. So don't take it personally.
Right. Yep.
Now, go ahead.
No, I was agreeing, agreeing with
Okay.
you.
Okay. Now, according to my research, a scholarly article I found by Mosley et al. From 2020 indicates that autistic women may be particularly vulnerable to suicide. Some
Yes.
studies suggest that they are more likely to experience suicidal thoughts and behaviors compared to autistic men. What are the differences when it comes to suicide in autistic women versus autistic men?
I think a lot of that is the diagnosis later in life and the misdiagnosis that they go through. A lot of women go through where they aren't believed about even that they're autistic, and they're
Mm-hmm.
given diagnoses of borderline personality disorder or something else,
Mm-hmm.
and just that disconnect becomes bigger, right? Because now they, the diagnosis that they receive doesn't go with their experience, and that's even a bigger disconnect than what they're probably already feeling socially.
So if we are experiencing suicidal ideations right now at this moment, instead of reaching, we talk about reaching out to friends and all, but let's say we're in crisis mode, it's 11 o'clock at night. What should we do? I'm sure there's some resources we can connect with. I know you touched upon 988. Can you
Yeah.
expand upon that and any other resources you would recommend to somebody who's having a crisis in the middle of the night?
Yeah. So there is always 988. That's 24/7 in the United States. You can connect with a crisis counselor. They're not necessarily um, trained to work with an autistic person. So a lot of autistic people have a difficult, sometimes a difficult connection with 988, but
Mm-hmm.
at least you're connected with somebody that late at night. Um, there's resources on my website developed by the Autism and Suicide Prevention Workgroup that you mentioned earlier,
Right.
um, where it sets the expectations for 988. It helps autistic people to have a successful call. So that's available on my website. There's also reasons for living, to make a list of reasons for living. And there's also using autistic strengths, which is really where I think, a lot of the support should be based from, is looking at the strengths of autistic people in a way that
Mm-hmm.
it's not usually looked at. So a lot of times when I was going through some difficult times, I would use rules, because I'm very rule based, and a lot of
Mm-hmm.
autistic people are rule based.
Mm-hmm.
So I would have a rule where I couldn't go in the room where maybe there was some medicine or some, other means, um, if I was having suicidal thoughts. So I would have that rule, and I would make sure that I followed that rule because of being rule based, which I look at as a strength in suicide prevention. Um,
Absolutely.
so they can do that as well. If they're, if 988 didn't work for them, they can make rules to keep themselves safe
And 988 is something you can either call directly or text to.
and
And they
chat.
have and chat. And there's a website 988lifeline.org, I believe. I will have a link to that in the description of this interview. So if you're looking for that, it will be in the video, the description for this interview.
Yeah, and some of the resources are on their website too. So that's good.
And we'll have a link to your website as well. We'll get to that in a moment, what that website is, but we will have that in the notes as well. When we are thinking about suicide as autistic adults, you kind of talked about reasons why we should avoid committing suicide, which there's a whole list of them, but we should think about that. Do we often think about how our decision or actions, if we do decide to go through a suicide, affect others in our lives when we are contemplating suicide? And can that actually help us or deter us from hurting ourselves and encourage us to reach out for help?
Well, I mean, yes. If you're, one of the reasons why I finally determined that I was suicidal was the thought that, people would be better off without me, which a lot of
Mm-hmm.
autistic people, when and people in general, when they get to that point, that's a dangerous place to be. So that could be identifying, right? That
Mm-hmm.
you need help if you start thinking that way. But autistic people tend to be fair. And, I suggest in my trainings that, being fair to themselves and not hurting themselves, or being fair to the people in their lives and not hurting them through hurting themselves, um, can help them to realize that that's not the way to go. So yeah, that can be helpful. And that sense of fairness is pretty high in a lot of autistic people.
Now, you mentioned a little bit earlier that you have yours. If I'm phrasing this wrong, please correct me. You are the survivor of two people who did, family members who did take their life via suicide. As a
Yes.
survivor of a loved one who committed suicide, what should we know about how suicidal ideations and suicide completion impacts our loved ones? What would you like someone to know if they're thinking about it from the other side of the table? What the survivors will have to encounter and deal with.
Oh, it's complete devastation, complete emotional devastation. You don't, there's so many thoughts that go through your mind, like, could I have said something? Could I have done something? Could I have helped them? Um, there's a lot of guilt. Um, there's hurt, there's confusion. It's such a, um, you know, sudden thing that
Hmm.
change is difficult. Um, your whole life, it becomes that before and after, right?
Hmm.
It becomes just a complete stop in your life, and you have to rebuild it from there, especially if they were very close to you. So it is very, very difficult for the people that are left behind.
And if you're contemplating suicide and you just heard what Lisa said, that it causes a loved one to feel guilt and that makes you feel good, you probably need to reach out for help immediately. Would you agree with that?
Yeah,
Because
I
we
do.
should not want to make other people feel guilty, because that's not the way we should live through life. We should, because we don't want to feel bad. We should not make other people feel bad. Now, you've shared your experience, one of your loss of a loved one from suicide, in a book called Living Through Suicide Loss with Autism Spectrum Disorder. Wonderful book. I read the book. I put a review of it up on my website, a video review I'm working on. Maybe it's up there. No, yeah, I think it is up there on my on the YouTube channel. And I also did a review on Goodreads and on Amazon. Wonderful, amazing book. I really enjoyed the book that you wrote in there, because it gave
Thank
us an
you.
insight of what goes through an autistic person's mind as they have to process all the ordeal that the survivors have to go through. I mean, all of the challenges which are hard for us in normal times, but adding on the emotions we're going through after a suicide even makes it more difficult. And you did a wonderful job breaking that down. And I recommend everyone to read this book, whether you're suicidal or not, lost a loved one or not, because you go in there and you take us into the mind of an autistic adult, one autistic adult, because everyone experiences autism differently, and gives everyone an idea how we process things and how we experience things. I think it was a wonderful book.
Thank you very much. And thank you for those book reviews too. They were amazing.
What signs should our allies be watching for that could indicate that we autistic adults are experiencing suicidal ideations?
A change from baseline, because we do withdraw for self-care. So a change in baseline of withdrawing more and not being as regulated afterward. Um, a change in baseline from anxiety, talk about going away, giving away prized possessions, talking about suicide more. Some autistic people have it as a special interest, maybe important, like Hollywood actors or, other important people, or just suicide itself. But making sure that it doesn't become suicidal ideation for that person. Um, so yeah, it's really a change.
And when our allies are experiencing this, what can they say or do that would help us? How could they start a conversation? If so, how?
Just asking, and being direct. If it doesn't take a lot of words. Just, are you thinking about harming yourself? Are you thinking about suicide? Do you have suicidal thoughts? Anything like that will open up that conversation. And when the answer comes, it can be hard to hear, but
Right.
reacting in a way that will help that other, the person who's experiencing suicidal thoughts to talk to you again is going to be really important. So, staying calm, listening to them, um, asking what they need, how can you help them, um, is all, really supportive.
When should an ally act and intervene on behalf of us when we are suicidal? Let's say I'm exhibiting signs of suicide. I don't really want to talk about it, but let's say our ally is concerned we're going to follow through on this. And I know that, the possibilities for that ally could reach out and say, hey, I know somebody who's suicidal, do a welfare check. When should an ally do that?
Well, I think checking in with somebody whenever you feel concern is good. If they have a plan, I probably wouldn't leave the person alone,
Hmm.
whether it's a parent or a relative or a friend. Um, that would be, that's really serious when somebody does have that plan.
Now, some allies may fear making a call. Let's say they're going to call a crisis line or call the police to do a welfare check or whatever, because they text them and they're not in the same location, whatever, right? So some allies may fear making that call to get help for us and fear that they may be wrong in that. Maybe they will lose that friendship, or worse, the call may push the person to go through with suicide. Now, I know you mentioned talking about suicide does not always push people through. What would you say to the people who are allies thinking, should I make that call? Should I reach out? Should I call and have somebody like the police come and check on them? What advice would you tell them if they have this hunch that this person may carry through a attempted suicide?
Well, that's a really difficult question because everyone is so different.
Hmm.
But I think if you're concerned about somebody, keeping in close contact with them, talking about that, like,
Right.
oh, talking about when they feel it's okay for you to call 911, or um, other, mental health rolling, like mobile crisis centers. In
Right.
some states, they have the mobile crisis centers. Having a plan with that person ahead of time so they know what's going on and you know what's going on and you know what to do. Just being open and honest with the person who's struggling is going to be helpful and supportive.
What needs to be changed? What needs to change, in your opinion, that can or will reduce the number of adults who suspect they're autistic, self identify as autistic, or have received a late diagnosis of autism from contemplating and or completing suicide?
What could help with that? Well, having
Yeah.
the professionals understand how to support an autistic person so that it's not such a difficult decision to call and possibly do more harm than help is one thing. So, training professionals to work with autistic people, communicating with them, understanding what they're like in crisis, how to be supportive is one thing. Um, and then just I guess is, being able to feel good about who you're going to send them to for help, because
Hmm.
it's just so difficult to know that, somebody you care about is struggling with suicide, but getting them help may harm them because people don't understand about how to support an autistic person in crisis. That's really the hard part.
Now, if there's someone in our audience who's watching this video, listening to this interview today, who's autistic and are contemplating suicide, what would you like them to know?
That there are people out there that do care, that nothing is permanent, everything can pass, and it is okay to reach out for help. um it may be difficult, but texting, calling, or chatting 988, you'll get somebody on the line who is, they may not understand autism, but they do understand suicide and people who are struggling with suicide. So I guess I would want them to know that it's okay to reach out for help, even though it is a bit difficult for autistic people.
How do you and Autism Suicide Prevention Workgroup serve the adult autism community, and how can our audience connect with you?
Well, we help the community by developing resources so that, so that professionals do know how to support autistic people. So we have the crisis toolkit that talks about communicating with autistic people in crisis, talks about how, we may think differently, how we may, have visual memories and literal thinking, so they can communicate with us better. We have a list of reasons to develop a list of reasons for living, which can be very helpful in remembering in a crisis why you want to stay and why you want to keep living. So we have several resources out there. We have a warning signs of suicide for autistic people because they're different than non-autistic people,
Mm-hmm.
that you can, show somebody who's supporting you. So we have those resources, and I can be available through my website.
And your website is?
It's www.autismcrisissupport.com.
And we'll get a link to that in the description of this interview as well as to 988 lifeline.org website, as well as to the book I mentioned earlier that you have written, living through. I don't have it in front of me. Forgive me. I'm trying to
That's
find it
okay.
real quick. Living through suicide with autism spectrum disorder. Did I get the title right or close to it?
Living living through suicide loss with an
So
autism spectrum disorder. Yeah.
I was off by one word. I did pretty
Yep.
good. And
You
there'll be
did
a
it
link to
well.
that in the description as well. And it is a affiliate link through Amazon. And as an Amazon associate, I would like to let you know that if you use that link to purchase this book, not only will you be making your life better, making Lisa happy, you'll also be supporting the work that I do here on this YouTube channel. So please, if you're thinking about buying that book, use that link that's in the video description. Is there any parting thoughts, anything you'd like to share or add that we have not covered you'd like the audience to hear today?
Yeah, a lot of autistic people live with suicidal ideation, and the just the way our minds work with rumination and
Mm-hmm.
perseveration, it can be a difficult place to be and difficult place to live. But there's always hope. There's always, I always think about it, there's always a new day. Um, there's always somebody, out there who can support or help. And even though it's difficult, there's one thing I wrote an article about this. Autistic people have, again, back with those strengths, we can picture just, let me try to get this right. Imagine, I guess, with our visual memories, places that are safe and secure and
Mm-hmm.
wonderful to be in. We can do that. We can also find joy and, flowers in the sky and birds. And there's always, that's what I do is, try to help people find joy. What can you find joy in today? It could be a picture or a dog or, another person. But there's always hope. That's how I ended my book. And I just believe that there's always hope.
Well, that's a great way to end our interview today. Lisa, thank you very much for joining us today. Our conversation, I'm sure, has been very insightful and will be very beneficial for people who check out this interview today, tomorrow, next week, next year, 5, 10 years from now, whenever they watch it. There's great information in here. And thank you so very much for the work that you do in our community. and and thank you for making time to visit with us today.
Well, and I thank you too, Chris, because not a lot of people want to talk about this, but the more we talk about it, the better it's going to be.
Yes. And most important thing I want people to get from this is if you're autistic and you're feeling suicidal, you're not alone. There's others in our community that are going through the same. And there's resources out there that can
Mhm.
help you through this very challenging time in life. Because every one of you is very important. Everyone who watches my channel, listens to my podcast, whatever, is very important. Because I appreciate everyone who subscribes. And I don't want to lose anyone because I don't like seeing my numbers go down. So please, if you're feeling suicidal, reach out for help. There are people who care about you and will help you through this because you're a valuable person. You have a lot to offer to the world, and being autistic is not a negative thing. It's a special gift. We get to see the world differently, and the world needs our view because the world's so boring without us.
Absolutely. I love how you said that.
And thank you for joining me today for this very important topic of suicide. And since this is a leading, if not the number one cause of death within the autism community, let's do something different today in the comments. I would like you to put something in the comments you would say that would be positive and supportive if you were talking to somebody who was autistic and contemplating suicide. Let's make the comment section full of positive thoughts and encouragement that if somebody visits this video and is contemplating suicide, these comments can help change their lives for the better. I would truly appreciate it, and anyone who reads those comments who is going through a rough time would appreciate it too. If this video resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more confidence building content for autistic adults. And be sure to ring the bell to be notified of new videos and when I go live. Until next time, I'm Chris Mitchell, the Confident Autistic, and I am all about helping you live confidently autistic.